Scavengers circle above the shattered battlefield. A giant crow is already diving toward Venlira, who lies among the broken swords. Greeted by such harsh hospitality, Venlira regains consciousness right on the dirt. She tries to wrap her head around it. Did she black out again? Her senses have returned, but it hasn't made things any easier. Venlira sits up amidst the smoke and ruined weapons, clutching her chest. How long was she out, and how did the battle even end? Her body's answer comes in the form of a violent cough. Venlira admits it. A few of her ribs are clearly no longer participating in the overall plan, but she checks her chest and quickly pulls herself together. She can still move, which means it's a bit too early to become crow food. She scans the debris-filled valley and spots an elven traveler in the distance. He lies amidst the ruins. The elf sits motionless by a column. Giant remains and rubble surround him. The other allies haven't fared any better. Reanimated undead have surrounded the monk, who is holding his ground inside a glowing magic circle. Nearby, a wounded warrior in a white cape is fighting off the undead and burning talismans, but he is clearly running on fumes. While the party is bogged down in this meat grinder, the demon lord towers over the valley. The warrior king prepares to answer his challenge. Purple energy floods the demon lord's demonic armor. He clearly demonstrates the kind of power he possesses. But the warrior king doesn't wait. He grips his sword and charges straight at the enemy. In response, the demon lord soars through the dust. A basic attack instantly turns into a very bad idea. Then he unleashes his purple magic and raises the undead all around him. His night of the dead begins. Seeing the risen legion, Venlira realizes the horrible truth. The enemy's ultimate trump card has just hit the field. Furious, she pulls on her skull mask and rises to her feet. Venlira curses the demon lord for hiding this army until the very end. Immediately after, she desperately calls out to the monk. The monk grabs an undead by the head amidst the burning talismans and immediately calls out to Rogue. Meanwhile, Venlira takes to the air and demands a blessing from the monk. Without his power, she's not diving into that mob. The monk channels a burning talisman and calls upon the enlightened one. He asks to bestow great power upon the party. As the spell gathers momentum, a dark-haired swordsman streaks by in a golden light. He commands the light to erase the pain. The dash brings the swordsman right to the demon lord. He flips over the embedded swords, while the purple giant is already charging to meet him. They clash in a blinding flash. Swords and armor collide without any ceremony. The swordsman lands on one knee on the cracked earth. He declares that he'll keep this small fry busy for now. Then the swordsman urges the warrior king on. It's time to push forward. The warrior king agrees with the command. He readies his glowing sword and demands to finish this. Having received the order, the swordsman dashes above the ground, leaving a purple trail. The warrior king continues moving below, but the demon lord intercepts the warrior king with a massive purple strike and knocks him backward, giving the hero no time to recover. The demon lord drops from above. The hero only manages to raise his sword to defend himself. The impact shatters the earth beneath them. Stone debris launches into the air. However, the warrior king bursts into the air. He tightens his grip on the glowing sword for a counterattack. The demon lord raises his massive purple blade over him. He clearly intends to finish the hero off in one swing. The warrior king slides down the slope in the smoke, and the demon lord relentlessly looms overhead. Yet the warrior thrusts his glowing sword right into the giant's chest. He promises the enemy a swift end. Looking over his blade at the enemy, the warrior king addresses him by his title, Demon Lord. But the latter immediately declares, nothing truly ends. He releases a purple mass from his body, and it wraps around the warrior king. While the warrior is bound by this energy, the demon lord gathers it into a blinding flash. He explains, any end is merely a form for what comes next. Seeing the purple glow going haywire, the warrior king realizes something terrifying. The enemy is about to blow himself up. However, the demon lord isn't allowed to have his beautiful suicidal finale. The dark-haired swordsman flies in with a short shout. The swordsman flies up to the stunned warrior king, smirks, and offers his help. Words match his actions. The swordsman slashes upward, and torrents of purple power hurl the demon lord into the air. He promises, since the demon lord is so eager for a loud finale, he'll gladly help him get it, and the fighters' powers clash head-on. A turquoise shockwave covers them both. Purple energy slices across the battlefield, and the swordsman calls out for Rogue. From the explosion, a purple mass plummets down. It leaves a black trail across the crimson sky. The mass crashes down next to the warrior king. Just one drop raises a colossal black pillar from the earth, the abyssal execution. The pillar pierces the clouds. The monk just stares at it, unable to hide his shock. The wind and flashes force the monk to shield himself with his arm. He tries to understand where this pillar of black light even came from. Through the smoke, the warrior king, clutching his wounded side, calls out to Rogue. Relieved, he says that he finally made it. At the hero's call, Rogue appears amidst the swirling smoke. For now, he is just a dark silhouette in a long cloak. The demon lord turns to Rogue and confesses. When he accepted the legacy instead of him, the enemy decided that fate itself had extended a hand to him. But now Now the demon calls this sign hollow. He reaches his hand, wreathed in purple energy, toward Rogue. While the enemy is distracted by Rogue, the warrior king slams him in the head. A flash, a cloud of dust. The strike was a solid one. The demon is stunned. The warrior king is still alive, and his eyes are already glowing purple. Furious, the enemy realizes the warrior king also has the right to inherit the dark mantle. Therefore, he screams at the hero lying among the debris. He demands that he immediately accept this right and inherit the dark mantle. In response, the monk channels the golden power of light into the warrior king. It lifts the hero off the ground. Having received this support, he instantly draws the radiant Ascalon, the demon-banishing blade, and charges at the enemy. The strike lands. The demon loses an arm, and purple energy gushes from the severed wound. Next, the enemy's mutilated body crashes to the ground. The impact blasts it into debris. Amidst the flying rocks, the monk anxiously calls out to both fighters. He needs to make sure they are alive. From the smoking slope, someone calls back to the monk. A relieved voice replies, "They finally found him." Approaching closer, the warrior king and the monk find Rogue on the ground. He now has white hair and black horns. Rogue clutches his red cloak. His body begins to heal right before their eyes. And then, from the cracked vessel, the demon lord's voice sounds again. He asks if Rogue enjoyed the taste of his blessing, and adds, this outcome is actually more advantageous for him. The warrior king falls to his knees. Horrified, he asks how the demon is even still alive. He calmly replies, his vessel has already fulfilled its purpose. Now it is crumbling to pieces on its own. The hero sits next to the monk as the enemy admits his defeat, but he doesn't plan to disappear quietly. Crumbling into pieces, the demon demands they listen to his final words. The warrior king looks at the fallen Rogue and hears the enemy's words. He declares the end of his story and passes the torch to Rogue. Falling apart, the demon lord finally prophesies countless choices for Rogue and a despair that will surpass anything he can imagine. He continues to crumble, yet still pressures Rogue. Responsibility, the demon says, can break anyone. Disintegrating into smoke, the enemy advises Rogue to pray from the bottom of his heart. Advice from a crumbling demon sounds especially cheerful. And then he tells him not to freeze in place. Rogue needs to move forward, while the warrior king and the monk stand over him and listen to the final parting words. The demon lord himself asks for only one thing: let Rogue's path not end the same way his own did, like the path of a madman and former naive fools. With this confession, his body completely tears apart into smoke, debris, and purple sparks. After such a finale, the battlefield empties. The warrior king and the monk remain beside the fallen Rogue. They are silent. The battle is finally over, and there is no strength left for pretty victory speeches. Thus ended the battle between the warrior king and the demon lord. The fate of the entire world was at stake. The world survived, and the townsfolk immediately surround the heroes. They shower the warrior king, the monk, Rogue, the elven traveler, and the townswoman with animal ears in confetti. While the town celebrates, the bound mage has already been snatched by the magic academy and taken back to the towers. He sits tied up and laughs next to an annoyed academy witch. The elven traveler doesn't linger at the celebration. He waves goodbye and sets off on the long journey back to his homeland. The monk finishes his final pleasantries, folds his hands in prayer, and turns away from worldly vanity once again. And the warrior king has to accept a new role. Wearing a royal mantle, he bows his head low. At the coronation, the elder places a crown upon his head. After defeating the demon, the hero officially receives the throne. Now the crowned hero raises his scepter before the plaza. The crowd responds with thunderous applause. Hands reach toward the dais through the falling confetti. Among the cheering people, Venlira smiles and claps along with everyone else. The warrior king has returned to his rightful place. Evil has withered away, and fear has vanished from daily life. Venlira greets this world with a wide smile, as if the whole nightmare had been a short fairy tale. Thus, peace was established in the kingdom for many long years, and then about 150 years pass. And here is Venlira, still sitting in a night forest. She scratches her head under her skull mask and admits, centuries have passed, and she hasn't changed at all. The former Rogue from the hero's party has already lived for over 150 years, and suddenly she starts to worry. What if she's gotten sick? But sickness has nothing to do with it. Over these years, mountains have been leveled, and endless plains have turned into deserts. Venlira looks up at the stars and realizes the only things that have remained unchanged are them and herself. Even the massive tree she's sitting by has managed to transform over the passing centuries. Examining her open palm, Venlira names the cause of her eternity, the curse of the undead. The demon lord handed her this curse before his death, calling it a blessing, and it is never supposed to disappear. Therefore, she clenches her fist and asks herself, what is the point of an existence with no end in sight? If she is denied even death and has no choice but to keep living, the answer to this question becomes especially vile. The thought of eternal loneliness hangs over the night mountains along with the starry sky. But Venlira is suddenly interrupted by a bright object streaking across the sky. She throws her gaze upward in shock. On the forest slope, a girl notices the falling stars, and next to her stands a reanimated skeleton wearing a sweater. 150 years have passed since the fall of the demon lord. The skeleton sits by the tree, and a purple light flickers in its eye socket. The girl turns to it warily. A thought surfaces in her wide-open eye. The sands of time have stopped, but now the sands have started flowing again. Amidst the white forest fog, he reaches out his hand to her. On the very outskirts of the empire lurks Spireberg, a settlement among towers, beyond which distant mountains rise. A forested mountain looms over Spireberg itself. At night, it looks less like a place for a stroll and more like a great way to get hopelessly lost. It is precisely in its foggy forest that the blonde girl stumbles upon the sitting Venlira. Instead of getting scared, the girl is surprised to see a child before her. The skeleton is immediately baffled. What is a child doing alone in the middle of a night forest? But the girl doesn't answer. She grabs her by the skull and stretches her face. To the little one, this isn't a monster, but an incredible find. A talking skeleton that you can easily twirl in your hands. Excited by the discovery, she keeps pulling at the undead's face, as if checking how well she was put together. Finally, Venlira swats her hands away and demands she stop this mockery of her bones. She adjusts her skull and grumbles. She's met plenty of lost children in her time, but this is the first one who decided to stretch her face like dough. After such an inspection, the skeleton asks instructively, wasn't the girl taught to run away from non-human creatures? She calmly replies that she was taught not to judge a book by its cover. The undead can only dryly praise this questionably useful wisdom. Because of the fearless guest, Venlira's nostalgic mood evaporates entirely. She sits with her arms crossed, while the girl is already settling down next to her. Since the skeleton hasn't gone anywhere, the little girl takes an interest in his unusual sword and asks if he's a knight. The skeleton corrects her. She is an imperial herald and delivers the emperor's words throughout the empire. Truth be told, right now she's stuck on this mountain to guard a magic sword, and simultaneously asks not to be called Mr. anymore. Hearing about her service to the emperor, the girl decides that the undead must be very strong. She gladly accepts the compliment. To solidify the impression, Venlira taps the glowing purple sword. Imperial errands, she declares, aren't given to those who lack the skills. The sword immediately confirms her words in its own way. In a flash, the spirit of the magic sword appears, and the herald adds, she is also required to master advanced magic, including necromancy. While the familiar swirls nearby, the girl again calls the skeleton Mr. and marvels at her strength. For this, she immediately receives another annoyed remark, but the admiration quickly turns into a request. The little girl asks to take her on as a student and make her just as strong. At such an offer, Venlira even smiles sinisterly. She has grown tired of the monotonous cycle of her life. However, with her very next phrase, she ruins everything and refuses to bother with training. The girl is amazed by her talent for destroying all expectations, but the refusal doesn't work. The little girl tackles the skeleton from behind, smacks her on the head, and calls her a greedy, heartless bonehead. Then she resentfully clarifies. She's willing to be called anything, but there's no need to call her Mr. The girl doesn't plan on giving up. She dashes off with a shout, and a pink spirit whirls between her, the undead, and the familiar. The skeleton tries to send the little girl home, but she waves her training stick and promises not to leave until she gets her agreement for lessons. Then she presses on the most obvious point. The girl's parents are probably already going crazy, and she herself already has enough of a reputation as a child snatcher. However, the little girl grimly asks her not to worry about that. The reason turns out to be heavy. Her house burned down along with her parents. The skeleton listens silently as the girl recalls her mother's instruction. Become stronger to survive on your own. That's why the little girl grips her training stick tighter. Now she has only one thing left, to actually become stronger. With this resolve, the girl turns to Venlira and confidently asks if she understands. She freezes, clenching her fist. After a story like that, waving the child off is no longer an option. In the end, she agrees to teach the little girl how to wield a blade. The girl joyfully raises her stick, while the familiar bounces nearby. The mentor explains her decision by citing the code of a true heroine. One cannot repeatedly reject a child's plea, and the girl only now shockingly realizes that the person before her is actually a woman. While the little girl profusely thanks her, the skeleton stands with her hands raised. It seems this turn of events has slightly stunned even her. The girl happily twirls her stick, and the familiar spins nearby. With theatrical suffering, he addresses her as his ruler and complains about this overly difficult ordeal. To this complaint, Venlira drops to the ground and pretentiously promises to teach her student how to stand on her own 2 feet. Thus she plans to atone for not delivering the familiar's message. And meanwhile, the duo rejoices on the sidelines. Atonement quickly turns into brutal practice. The mentor parries the girl's strikes with a training stick. Sticks alone aren't enough for her. She unleashes spectral beasts from her purple sword for training, horned creatures with bone faces. The student isn't frightened for a second. She grabs 2 blades and rushes in pursuit of the spectral beasts. The mentor watches her go in absolute stupor. After this hunt, they find find a new amusement. Venlira and the girl stand opposite each other and contort their fingers, pretending to be creepy monsters. And they put on this performance right out of the bushes in front of a traveler with a staff. He turns around, and there is a skeleton and her student diligently acting like a forest nightmare. The nightmare works a little too well. The traveler passes out. The girl screams in terror, while the undead just looks at the result of the prank. While the man lies on the ground, the little girl calmly falls asleep, leaning against him. The mentor sits under a tree and stands guard over this incredibly weird sleepover. But when it comes to training, there is no leniency. The girl charges at Venlira with a wooden sword, and she deftly sidesteps the line of attack, giving her mentor no breathing room. The student puts the full span of her arms into the next swing. She responds, and the wooden swords begin to blur one after another. Student and mentor exchange rapid strikes. The girl is already raising her sword for a new attack, but the mentor keeps her blade at the ready. The lesson is not over yet. Thus passes 11 years. The student grows up and stands waist-deep in a forest lake. After so many years, Venlira still cares for her in her own way. She brings a caught rabbit and calls her to eat. The blonde girl responds to the call and acts surprised. Is it already time to eat? She climbs out of the water, adjusts her wet clothes, and promises her mentor she'll be right there, and she'll help with the cooking too. A pot bubbles by the campfire. The conversation starts carefully. The girl addresses her mentor as Mr. Over dinner, the girl confesses to Venlira. She's been wanting to say something important for a long time. The mentor raises her spoon and immediately asks, "What kind of weird preamble is this now?" The student lowers her gaze and explains that her village recently vanished. The reason turned out to be grim. Monsters started spawning out of nowhere, the residents fled, and the empire, according to rumors, abandoned the frontier towns. People are giving up and insisting that there is no hope left. The mentor listens silently, without interrupting. That is why the student is gathering her courage. Since she has become strong enough, it's time to do something about it. Venlira instantly reads her thoughts and asks if she wants to become a warrior herself. The girl freezes. Her mentor hit the bullseye again. The mentor reminds her. She trained this student for 11 whole years. One glance is enough for her to understand her intentions. As proof, she recalls a friend. He too dreamed of becoming a great hero and saving people. Everyone laughed at him and insisted he didn't have the right qualities, but he didn't back down. The mentor passes on her friend's main principle to her student. You don't need anyone's approval to save people. And the girl is the sole successor of the northern hunting art. Now, this power moves forward along with her. After these words, the mentor pulls out an ornate dagger and solemnly hands it to her dear student. Extending the weapon, she wishes the girl to draw this blade only with righteous intentions. Now the mentor lets her go on her journey. She tells her to save the world and be sure to return to her. The student joyfully raises the dagger above her head. The mentor promises to wait for her right here. Seeing her off, Venlira asks a practical question. How many years will this saving the world take? The student walks deeper into the forest and replies, probably 5 years, maybe even 10. The mentor is left alone in the clearing by the tree. While her student saves the world, she has to look after this place and wait for her return. The girl is already dashing across the clearing. No matter how many years pass, she will save the world and definitely come back. And by the small shrine, all the mentor can do is wait. A green sprout breaks through the soil next to the cloth-wrapped structure. Time doesn't stand still after all. Venlira sits in the dark forest, clutching a cloth-wrapped object, and remembers that brief encounter. After it, she was left alone again. Then again, waiting is something she's long been used to. But her loneliness is broken by her returned student. She teases her mentor again, saying she must have gotten lost in the forest. She asks with a chuckle how many times she has to repeat the same thing. Since so much time has passed, the mentor decides to cut her some slack. The student sits by the tree covered in wounds and still calls her Mr. Seeing her student in such a state, the mentor simply stays silent and looks at her. She has no words for this reunion, and she just smiles and asks with bitter irony, as if she had only been gone a minute. The joke sounds cheerful, but her bandaged leg immediately gives away the price of her return. The girl sits on the ground and holds her wound with her hand. The mentor tries to say something, but the student suddenly laughs. Everything she experienced became such an adventure for her that even the pain can't stop her from smiling. The student begins to tell her how massive the empire turned out to be. Everywhere you go, there are new lands, places, and things she never even knew about before. But along with the wonders, there were also monsters in the empire. The girl proudly explains she helped people using the techniques her mentor taught her. For her help, the people dubbed her a warrior, almost a hero. This kind of hero quickly became a thorn in the emperor's side. He declared the girl an obstacle to consolidating power and ordered her executed. After this part of the story, the student's strength runs out. Her head is spinning and her breathing falters. But even swaying from weakness, she hugs her mentor and asks how she lived without her. At the same time, she needles her, hoping she didn't cry her eyes out. Without letting go of her mentor, the girl confesses. Now she wants to hear her story. It seems the journey is over, but the conversation is just beginning. However, the girl is absolutely not ready to let her mentor go. She begs her not to leave. Venlira stays close and agrees. Peace on the mountain doesn't last long. Clanking in their armor, Imperial soldiers with spears and shields make their way up the forested slope. One soldier grumbles. The wanted warrior could have just quietly died instead of making everyone comb the mountain. The squad commander quickly shuts the loudmouth up and reminds them they are here on a mission. But order doesn't save them from surprises. The commander spots the student among the trees and tells her to grab her junk and get off the mountain. The word mountain triggers the mentor harder than the order itself. She cracks her straps and slowly repeats it. And then, surrounded by a purple haze, she asks the soldiers, does this place still look like an ordinary mountain to them? The answer emerges right out of the purple glow. Amidst the wood and bone masses, a giant eye opens. The mountain is looking at its uninvited guests. 120 years ago, Venlira rode through these lands as an imperial herald and found the remnants of the demon lord's army here. Demonic creatures were still attacking in hordes. Back then, she didn't hold back. She chopped the beasts to pieces, smashed their heads, and tore out their guts. After the massacre, only bodies and purple energy remained all around. Over time, dirt settled on the piles of dismembered remains, trees grew, and the place turned into this very mountain. She set up camp here so that no necromancer would get their hands on a ready-made deposit of bodies. But now, there's no need to guard the mountain from necromancers anymore. The mentor towers over the reanimated undead, because this entire dead army already belongs to her. The commander tries to fight off a corpse and yells at his soldiers to form up. Only, a formation against an animated mountain of bodies doesn't look very convincing anymore. Wiping blood from his arm, the commander clings to his only hope. Even a necromancer has a limit to the number of corpses they can control. He is about to order everyone to just hold out, but an entire mass of reanimated undead rises before him. The theory about control limits suddenly becomes very weak comfort. Panic breaks out all around, and the soldiers call for the captain. The commander in the hood and mask can only stare straight ahead. And then, under a crimson sky, a true legion appears. The reanimated undead charge into the attack, led by the horsemen of the undead legion. Raising so many dead is only possible for a necromancer of unfathomable power. The horseman readies his purple spear. The commander of the Imperial search squad is still trying to understand who is in front of him. But the commander doesn't get to finish his question. A purple strike cleaves him to death. The commander's headless body falls to the ground, while the horseman is already riding away. One swing was enough for his entire battle. Amidst the crimson fog, Venlira raises a massive blade and asks again, who is she? It looks like the soldiers won't be needing the answer anymore. She hefts a colossal black blade bathed in purple light and finally introduces herself. She is the Emperor's herald, the voice of the Empire itself. Since the voice of the Empire has spoken, she orders her people to listen closely. At her words, the rocky plain cracks and massive fissures crawl across the ground. This rumble even reaches a house near the battlefield. A young man by the battlefield looks out the window, trying to understand who decided to shatter the earth to pieces out there. And she continues her verdict. If the Empire strays from the path upon which it was founded, the consequences will come without any discount for past merits. And her words instantly receive very convincing backup. The reanimated undead push up the rocky slope, clamber over stones, and level their spears. Through the smoke and flying debris, the ranks of undead don't slow down. And she promises the nobility and her loyal servants a chance to fix everything. Now she stands on a graveyard of giant bones and skulls. Crimson clouds gather over this scene. From this mountain of bones, she addresses her old country. The reckoning for its tyranny is near, and by all accounts, the hour of reckoning has already arrived. A wounded fugitive near the village crawls across the grass, using his last bit of strength, gasping heavily for air. But salvation ahead looks pretty bleak. Black smoke is already rising over the village under the red sky, and the houses are burning. Reaching the entrance, the fugitive reaches out to the armed Imperial soldiers. He is relieved. He finally reached the village. But the joy ends quickly. The reanimated undead have already breached the southern edge of Spireberg and are clashing with Imperial soldiers. The soldiers immediately call for reserve squads and order everyone to fall in line. One of them stares at a giant purple skeletal hand and then spouts a completely bizarre string of words about a sunflower and a baked potato. The cause of all this nightmare hovers over the smoking village. Venlira sits astride one of the necromancer's flying beasts. Looking at the fire, the soldiers realize they aren't up against some rookie who decided to play around with necromancy. This becomes especially clear when entire hordes of undead pour out of the smoke. This isn't just a squad anymore, it's a full-fledged legion. Ishur Soma breaks through to meet the legion. He shoves the soldiers aside and demands they clear the way. The knight immediately drops into a low stance. He prepares a technique from the Eye of the Blade style. The preparation is complete. He meets the rushing undead with a wide sweep. After the attack, the swordsman exhales heavily but doesn't let go of his weapon. He scans the battlefield and can't believe it. it. Someone managed to raise an entire army of undead. However, the knight decides that he dealt with the first wave a little too quickly, and relaxed, he stretches his hand forward. But Venlira already appears over the field. She is the exact reason this entire legion caused such a ruckus. She stands on a massive purple palm and looks down at the knight. He understands. Before him is the necromancer controlling the legion. This is what puts him on edge. An enemy like this usually hides behind their minions, but she stepped right into the line of fire. The pause lasts only a moment, and then the eye of the blade style cuts through the undead again with precise strikes. Venlira notices the sudden attack. While the attack shreds the corpses, she gets pinned down in the ruined plaza by a giant purple corpse and one-eyed spearman. The colossus, along with the spearman, charges at her. She strikes exactly at the leg of the giant corpse, and at such angles from which a strike isn't expected at all. Taking a hit to the leg, the giant corpse recognizes its opponent. After that, it explosively shoots up over the rooftops, leaving a black trail in the sky. Following right behind, Ishur Soma lands among the debris. His sword is already at the ready, but Venlira instantly grabs his weapon and breaks his attack. The swordsman still slashes in response, but she dodges the blade. The exchange of blows pauses for a brief moment. The knight goes for a wide swing again. She proves faster and sharply strikes his leg. He bends over in pain, clutching his injured leg, giving him no chance to recover. Venlira unleashes a flurry of rapid strikes upon the knight. He jumps back and in desperation delivers another wide slashing attack. After the trade, the swordsman breathes heavily and wipes the blood from his mouth. He calls his opponent a monster, but Ishur Soma doesn't panic. Instead, he smirks. Since his clash with the four horsemen, no one has pushed him this far, and immediately he demands to know what kind of creature is standing before him. Venlira answers without unnecessary theatrics. He is facing a vengeful spirit, short, clear, and already sufficiently unpleasant. The knight decides not to rush in head-on. It's better to buy some time and piss his opponent off a little more. So he starts to mock her. He asks exactly which pathetic corpse she has come to avenge. She coldly parries. They have sent so many people to their graves that she can't even tell which victim he's talking about. Ishur Soma's calculation isn't random. Necromancy rapidly exhausts the caster, especially when controlling a huge territory and an entire mob of bodies. He's about to simply wait for her to burn out, but his thoughts are cut short by a sudden confrontation. In the next second, Venlira grabs the knight's face with her palm and strikes. He is left with just one very wide, terrified eye. She leans over him and accuses him of wearing his murders like a badge of honor, while he butchered her people for a pathetic scrap of power. Covered in blood, he still bares his teeth and mockingly asks, was it worth it? After that, the knight throws his own accusation. Chasing her cost him his child, and instantly, he raises a jagged purple blade. Blood drips from Ishur Soma's mouth, but he only snarls harder. This man clearly has more stubbornness than common sense. When the weapon is right in front of his face, he catches it with his hand. He won't allow himself to be finished off. However, Venlira replies without talking. A long kick throws the knight off balance. The strike sends him flying into a pile of rubble. He crashes through a stone wall with his own back. Even from the ruins, Ishur Soma continues to run his mouth. He claims that, for a monster, Venlira whines way too much. He justifies everything he's done for the greater good and the empire. Other people's lives, according to him, were a necessary sacrifice. Venlira flips his own logic against him. If that's the case, then the knight's death by her hand will also become a necessary sacrifice. But she makes it clear right away he doesn't make the rules anymore. He just smirks by the shattered wall and promises that she won't finish him off today. The reason for his confidence immediately appears over the city. Vertical blue pillars of magical energy shoot up around Venlira. Underground, the magic node operator reports. The relays are placed along the barriers. The circuit is stabilized and connected to 155 mana batteries. The anti-undead force field is ready, and the captive corpses are already locked inside the construct. That's where the confidence comes from. The knight smugly announces, mission accomplished. Right after that, the field is activated. A blue dot flares up on the mountainside. A blue beam shoots from the peak into the sky, and a massive ring of light expands around the mountain. The reanimated undead dive down from the red sky, but they fly straight into the already deployed trap. Right before the Imperial soldiers' eyes, the purple figures of the undead blur and vanish, as if they were simply switched off. The soldiers notice the entire horde disappearing. Joy instantly mixes with anxiety. This magic wipes out an entire army a little too easily. Ishur Soma informs Venlira with a satisfied smirk. Her legion of undead is no more. He explains that this is no ordinary battlefield. This place operates a defense mechanism created 120 years ago by a mage from the warriors' party. And no matter how strong the enemy is, they can't survive inside this field for long. At least, that's what he warns Venlira. As the trap crackles with magic, a young man near the battlefield flashes in the frame. That idiot was painfully obsessed. Everything had to be done properly. The Imperial Knight, sitting by the rocks, hears these words and looks visibly confused. confused. It seems the conversation has suddenly veered completely off the track he anticipated. Venlira calmly replies, "Losing the Legion changes nothing. She will raise another army. Moreover, her opponent has already prepared those who will stand beside her himself." Ghostly townsfolk step out of the darkness. These are the people whom men like him exploited and tortured. A blonde ghost appears among them. Venlira's threat becomes crystal clear. Now these fallen victims will unite under the banner of revenge. She promises the Empire a meeting it definitely won't be happy about. Together with the ghostly townsfolk, Venlira herself will come to ring its death knell. The immortal necromancer's revenge is moving to a whole new level. Venlira and her 4 comrades, the blonde warrior, the elf in the green cape, the mage in the pointed hat, and the warrior woman in the orange cloak, did not like war. But this quintet hasn't had a choice for a long time. To protect their own, they had to take from others. Death on the battlefield became as mundane as mud on their boots, and the reanimated undead were already crawling up the slope. And yet, they believed this nightmare was over. The blonde warrior stepped into the square with his staff, and cheering citizens welcomed the new era of peace. But for Venlira, the celebration was left in the past long ago. She walks alone across the cracked field. Every step echoes in the emptiness. Images of her old comrades float before her, but the memory itself is cracking. She asks herself, what did they even fight for if the future took so many lives anyway? From these thoughts, her image falls apart. The black head separates from the body. She admits she doesn't understand anything anymore. Finding no answer within herself, Venlira walks through the fog toward a distant silhouette. It stands in a bright light. Along the way, she rewinds the past again and tries to remember what she was thinking when she first went to war. But then comes an even more painful question. Who exactly was she fighting for back then? In an era where not a single old comrade remains, Venlira doesn't know where to go next. She can only dream that someone, anyone, would point the way. 4 days after the warrior's death, this path leads her to the north of the continent, to a snow-covered adventurer's village right by the mountains. There, Venlira walks into a tavern carrying a battered map. She politely explains she was walking north along the ridge and got lost. She hands the map to the tavern patrons and asks them to point out the right direction. It seems like a 10-second favor, but the adventurer captain immediately shuts the uninvited guest down. This is an adventurer's guild, not an information desk for locals. She calmly replies that she understands perfectly. It's just that the tavern door was the only open one in town. She just needs directions and she'll leave. Such politeness doesn't disarm the rude guild patron. He gets annoyed and complains. This stranger just waltzed in here with such a demand. The captain goes further. He tells her point blank there is definitely something wrong with her. He names the reason right away. For an ordinary lost vagabond, she smells way too heavily of blood. She listens to the accusation in silence. Since suspicions have already been raised, the captain strikes up a conversation about a disturbing rumor, and behind his back hides a green-mouthed guild scout. The scout eavesdrops on the story about Spireberg beyond the mountains. There, a necromancer slaughtered the knights and defiled the city. That story sounds a little too convenient next to the undead who just walked into the tavern. The captain latches onto the rumor and shoots a wary glance to the side. The puzzle in his head is starting to come together, but he doesn't get to finish his thought. An explosive blast of force suddenly slams into the captain's back. He withstands the blow, throws his hand out, and finishes his thought. The rumor about the necromancer was exactly about her. Venlira no longer hides her skeletal form and raises her hands to attack. In response, she is called a vile undead. The negotiations ended faster than the search for directions. She replies coldly. Her opponent is behaving far too rudely. And then she warns. Before baring their fangs, they should have assessed who they were messing with first. Right after the warning, a massive strike shakes the room. An explosion thunders over the captain. The captain remains in the smoke and silently assesses just how far things have gone off his plan. While he hesitates, she spots the green-mouthed scout by a breach in the floor. The armed spy is already lying there. The covert surveillance has failed. The captain realizes the same thing. She sensed the foreign presence and blew the ambush, but he has no intention of backing down. On his order, an adventurer in a poncho charges at her. The captain himself stays by the table. Venlira extends her palm to both of them and reminds them of a simple fact. She just came in to ask for directions. Since they decided to launch a hunt themselves, she cracks her knuckles and warns, whatever happens next will be on their conscience. This doesn't stop the adventurer in the poncho. He launches into the air with his weapon drawn, rushing to finish the skeleton off. His strike misses. She sharply steps aside, and the adventurer's first attack meets empty air. He pays for that miss instantly. She fires a purple beam from her eye socket, showering the adventurer with a series of explosive hits. The technique drives the poncho-wearing adventurer into the floor, and she's already rushing forward while the captain watches the devastation. But the adventurer stubbornly gets up and winds up his long weapon again. He doesn't get a second swing. She grabs him by the collar with her bandaged hand. The fight turns into a one-sided execution. Venlira grabs the poncho adventurer by the face and violently violently slams him into the floor, leaving the first brave fool lying there. She steps out into the courtyard through clouds of smoke. In the courtyard, two hooded figures are already waiting for her, one with scarred cheeks, the other with a diagonal scar. They surround her, and one holds a knife at the ready. Their encirclement lasts exactly 1 second. Venlira shoots into the air and knocks both attackers off their feet in one single dash. The hooded men only have time to realize that they were the ones who just got caught off guard, and she lands on all fours with a thunderous crash. The shockwave kicks up dust across the entire courtyard. The captain notices this strike. Two of his men vanish in the smoke, and he finally grasps the scale of the problem. Losing sight of her, the captain warily looks around, and rightly so, but it's too late. Venlira flies out from the side and brings down a flurry of blade strikes upon him. The captain rushes to meet her. She responds with the passing fangs technique. A purple light flares in her eye socket. She prepares the 8-bladed fangs. The adventurer captain is breathing heavily, but still holding his ground. He raises his sword for a counterattack. However, Venlira makes a feint from the right. She forces her opponent to defend in entirely the wrong spot. The captain recognizes the feint and waits for the real attack, but that knowledge isn't enough. She closes the distance instantly and lands the real strike right through his guard. The captain's eyes fly wide open. The strike hit its mark. Next, he is thrown across the entire courtyard. He crashes into the ground with a heavy thud. By the wall, two adventurers from the Northern Guild stare at this spectacle in shock. Their captain just got smeared across the yard. The guild captain himself lies amidst the rubble and dust. A stunned conclusion already echoes around. The undead put their boss down in a single hit. After that, the two adventurers nervously watch Venlira. The fear on their faces can no longer be hidden. She straightens up amidst the smoke and asks point blank, who among the survivors wants to be next? There are no volunteers. Then the undead harshly cuts off this nonsense and tells everyone to stand down. From the balcony, Thor Vinland intervenes. He says the guest has made her point perfectly clear and promises to give her what she came for. The Northern Guild adventurers turn to their guildmaster in shock. It seems their boss decided to talk rather than continue fighting. He walks down the stairs and courteously introduces himself to Venlira. She is standing before the head of the Empire's northernmost adventurers guild. After this, the guildmaster invites her to step inside with him to discuss everything without unnecessary witnesses. Thus, the conversation moves to the guild leader's office. Its door creaks open. Inside the office, Thor Vinland starts off with an old adventurer's tale about a skeleton behind the back mountain of Spireberg that terrifies old travelers. The guild has sent search parties there multiple times to check out the legend, but no one found anything, so the rumor was written off as a regular ghost story. Now the guildmaster notes the legend was true all along. He asks what Venlira has to say to that, and she just laughs sinisterly from her chair. But the laughter is cut short by a loud bang. Thor instantly tenses up. However, she has no intention of wasting time on small talk. She clenches her fist and declares she didn't come here to chat with the guildmaster. Since he called her to his office, she demands he stop beating around the bush and finally spill exactly what he wants from her. Backed into a corner by her bluntness, Thor Vinland takes a pause and then promises his request is a simple one. He pulls out some cigarettes and explains. Officially, the guild serves the Empire, but the Empire left them to their fate many years ago. Because of this managerial approach, villagers are fleeing their homes. Those who stay take on non-guild jobs and die, while the survivors wait in constant fear for the next monster raid. The guildmaster clicks his lighter and lights up. Then he grimly summarizes, everyone here is just slowly waiting for the day they get slaughtered. But pity definitely doesn't move her. Venlira cuts him off. They should have stood up to the Empire when they had the chance. And she adds even colder, if you do nothing, you don't have to change anything, because nothing will change. This reproach hits Thor's pride. He objects. The problem wasn't inaction at all. The guildmaster admits a much uglier truth. The guild simply didn't have the strength to oppose the Empire in any meaningful way. After the Empire left, the abandoned lands survived on their own. Adventurers banded together to protect their families and homes. Other guilds also worked themselves to the bone, holding their borders. Hearing this, Venlira asks directly, why didn't all these guilds form an alliance and strike at the Empire together? Thor Vinland answers, it's more complicated than it looks from the outside. Such an alliance would have instantly sparked a war. Bravery alone can't fix this disaster. He continues, such a decision would have been paid for with far too many lives. She catches onto this bitter logic. War would have made rivers of blood flow, so the people waited for someone to pull them out of their doom. Everyone clung to life and prayed that hope would finally arrive. And one day, hope gained a face. The blonde girl who met the skeleton appeared. To those who saw her, this girl became a true warrior. The hope she brought thawed the people out from their despair. They believed that she was the one capable of saving them all. But Venlira calls this belief futile. She doesn't understand at what point everything went awry, blaming either her own sentimentality or an old regret that never quite burned out. However, meeting her clears something up for Thor Vinland. What their people lacked wasn't hope, but hatred. sacred. She defines the price of war without any sugarcoating. You have to be ready to end up with no tomorrow and no home, and also to die if it means taking another life. After such a confession, the undead gets down to business. She says she wants a job. Thor Vinland immediately promises to assign 2 adventurers for immediate departure, and then to rally all the guild's forces to support her mission. He doesn't care what she turns out to be, a vengeful spirit, a demon, or a monster. To the guildmaster, what matters more is whose side she is on. That is why he bows before Venlira and asks her to accept his people into her crusade. This readiness even makes her apologize for trashing the guild building. She admits her own guilt too. She let the empire rot until the city deteriorated to its current state. A red token lands on the table. It turns out its owner hasn't taken a job in over 150 years. Thor stares at the revealed token and instantly drops his entire guildmaster poker face. Before him lies an adventurer's token of the ruby class. This is the highest rank from the days of the Great War, long thought to have vanished. Thor Vinland can no longer hold back. He demands an explanation. Who is Venlira, really? But she asks him not to dwell on it. Venlira calls herself merely a shameful ghost from a rotten past and clenches her bandaged hand. Instead of revelations, she gets to work. She is setting out to a place where the snow never stops. Her path lies through the great northern mountain ranges. Venlira walks forward, straight through the snow. The route begins at the Northern Adventurers Guild and stretches to Spireberg. That is where she directs her new journey. The 5th day of the trek across the snowy ridge drags on beneath heavy clouds. The party is already counting how much time has passed since leaving the village. Murin Sum confirms they've been walking for 5 days. The group stuck to the mountains to slip by unnoticed. That's exactly why their pace surprises Venlira. For people hiding from the Empire, they are moving way too fast. Murin reminds her, running into the Imperial army right now is the last thing they need. She latches onto those words, fast and stealthy. It seems a decidedly unpeaceful plan is already forming in her skull. The reason lies right below. Spireberg's Imperial Knights have set up camp in the snowy valley, the very same steel roaches, as Venlira instantly dubs them in her mind. The knights themselves have no idea who managed to outpace them, and they clearly don't see the strangers as a regular search party. Murin's black-haired companion explains, these are most likely Spireberg stragglers. They pillaged villages alongside bandit gangs, and now they're trying to regroup and return to the capital. The map confirms everything. The Imperial remnants also marched through the passes, got cut off, and are now freezing without proper winter gear. And the necromancer is right near their gathering point. Once the camp situation is clear, Murin's companion asks where the lower trail leads, but instead of an answer, she simply utters, Murin Sum. Murin irritably corrects her. That's his name, not the companion lying nearby. He also demands she at least remember who she's traveling with. The black-haired companion steers the conversation back on track. The lower road leads to small farmsteads, where the knights will surely drop by for food and supplies. Murin grimly adds, for Imperial knights, robbing civilians' homes has long become a habit. He clarifies that with the arrival of the current emperor, this became the norm across all provinces. She calmly accepts the news, and that calmness is deeply unsettling, because her conclusion is brutally simple. The robbers must die. Murin visibly shudders at such a verdict. The guide, it seems, just stopped being a weird ally and became a full-blown problem. The black-haired companion tries to ask again, but the conversation is cut short by a dull thud at the edge of the abyss. He and Murin look down in shock. Something just crashed into the snow. Now they just need to figure out what. The answer flies right into the camp. The snow erupts next to the Spireberg knights, and the shockwave knocks the armored men off their feet. The knights scramble up in a panic, quickly realizing the truth. They've been ambushed. Venlira emerges from the snow, a purple cluster of energy in her hand. The knights' worst fears are confirmed. Yes, this is a textbook ambush. From the cliff, the black-haired companion and Murin watch her entrance in horror. Is she trying to get herself killed? Then Murin remembers the main thing. She can't die twice anyway. The necromancer charges into the formation with a glowing purple blade. The knights barely have time to raise the alarm and brand her the necromancer from Spireberg, but no one gets to finish their sentence. A purple strike pierces one knight and scatters the rest across the snowy slope. More purple energy flares up around her. The armored soldiers keep flying into the snow as if their heavy gear suddenly weighed nothing at all. One of the knights recognizes the technique. It's the northern style. She instantly shows off its follow-up, the beast pack slaughter move. The necromancer dashes across the slope, leaving a trail of purple light behind her blade. The female commander tries to regain control. She orders the squad to surround the lone enemy and strike together, but the soldiers are already screaming for help, and the enemy is winding up a new swing. The encirclement completely falls apart. With one strike, she brings down the commander along with her black horse. While the commander is falling, Venlira impales the necromancer's newly spawned purple beast, and then the reality hits. The knights aren't facing just one warrior. The impaled beast is treated to a mocking taunt. Its eyes, it turns out, are purely decorative attentive if it hasn't noticed the obvious by now. And the obvious is already glaring. The rest of her summoned beasts swarm the Spireberg Knights while she stands amidst the flashes of her own magic. From the cliff, the black-haired companion and Murin coldly evaluate the massacre. The power she displayed at the guild hall was just a fraction of what she could do. Down below, this assessment gets a very graphic confirmation. The summons grab and tear the knights apart, while the necromancer never stops advancing. She raises her glowing blade, seemingly agreeing with the observers. They haven't seen her full strength yet. Following this, the beasts simultaneously shred and toss the Imperial Knights aside. The squad has zero chance to regroup, but the slaughter spirals out of control even for her. Venlira plunges her glowing purple blade into one of her own beasts, and magical fluid gushes from the monster. Standing amidst torn bodies and bloody splatters, she earns a new moniker. She is now known as the Ghost of Spireberg. As the Ghost of Spireberg finishes mopping up the plains, the black-haired companion notes that it's almost over. He and Murin decide to descend from the cliff. Down below, she's already standing next to her main argument, a massive purple beast. Meanwhile, the summoned creatures crush a surrounded Imperial Knight. The numbers are on their side, so this won't be a long fight. Amidst this carnage, a spearman in gray armor still steps up to face her one-on-one. Before the clash, he lets out a heavy sigh. The warrior doesn't even have time to ready his stance. The purple beast charges, and she breaks his tempo with a strike to his weapon, giving the spearman no time to recover. The necromancer aggressively lunges forward. The dash ends brutally. With a powerful kick, she knocks him off the purple beast. After the strike, a golden medallion on a red cord falls onto her poncho. The exact same medallion hangs around the wounded spearman's neck. As his hood is ripped off, his bloodied face freezes in shock. A memory surfaces of the moment this medallion was offered as a token of remorse. The scene shifts back to a conversation in a wooden room. Venlira turns to the speaker and asks what this item is. Father Mitchell awkwardly admits their caution wasn't entirely baseless. The necromancer's appearance, to put it mildly, isn't great for first impressions. She learns that the medallion is a charm for the safe return of adventurers. It was made by Father Mitchell's daughter. She happily accepts the gift and asks him to pass her gratitude to the crafter. But Father Mitchell instantly turns gloomy. The reason is horrific. 2 years ago, Father Mitchell's daughter was murdered by the Imperial Army. Venlira freezes in silence. He apologizes for bringing it up, but immediately adds, he has nothing to be sorry for. He and his companions are equally broken by their hatred for the Empire. Father Mitchell's companions drag a heavy wooden crate, calling themselves butchers. They lick their wounds and live for one single thought, revenge. That's why Father Mitchell warns Venlira, don't ruin your life chasing vengeance like they did. He reminds her, everyone has someone waiting for them at home. She silently absorbs the advice. These words echo with the voice of the spearman in gray armor. Even bleeding out, he begs Venlira not to step too far into the darkness. But she answers with actions, not words. The necromancer kicks the wounded spearman down the snowy slope. At the bottom, the spearman breathes heavily. Up top, only Venlira and her purple beast remain. Looking down at her defeated enemy, she bows her head and asks for forgiveness. In another agonizing memory, Father Mitchell lies covered in blood. He barely whispers the name Mitchell and tries to say how much he loves her. A purple spearman stands before the bound necromancer. Father Mitchell is lying face down in the snow, also whispering an apology. She silently watches as the purple spearman approaches. He leaves her no space and no time to escape. And yet, Venlira strikes first. Her fist smashes into the monster's head with a deafening crack. The hit connects. She raises her fist, while Murin's black-haired companion and Murin, some praise Sir Skeleton's handiwork from afar. The black-haired companion reports. The battle on the other side is also wrapping up. He and Murin suggest she take a rest. They'll handle gathering the corpses for new undead. But her decision leaves them baffled. A necromancer asking not to collect the dead is a rare breed indeed. Murin explains to the companion that Venlira ordered every fallen body to be cremated. She has zero intention of turning them into undead. Thus, she stands alone before a massive bonfire, devouring a wooden pyre. Staring into the raging flames, the necromancer admits she doesn't know this man's history. The black-haired companion looks into the fire, acknowledging there's something terribly sad about the stranger. Murin listens in silence. This campout definitely won't be a cheerful one. Venlira stands before the roaring wall of fire. She is bound in ropes and completely still, as if the flames dragged a rather unpleasant chunk of her past to the surface. A multi-eyed spectral entity crawls out of the fire behind her back. It reminds Venlira of an old promise. The torch has already been passed to her. The entity keeps pressing on the wound. The necromancer will have to make countless choices, and each one will lead her to unimaginable despair. The entity starts rambling about how true despair hasn't even begun for her yet, and that she has a role in a grand design. But Venlira cuts this prophetic circus off mid-sentence. Since the uninvited oracle loves talking about death so much, she advises the entity to do her a favor and go straight to hell. In response, the multi-eyed entity just cackles maliciously. It reminds reminds Venlira that she herself is dead and looks completely hollow. Then it invites her to fight the current of fate all she wants. But the entity demands the last word. At the end of her path awaits a hopelessness that even this creature cannot fathom. The purple smoke vanishes. Venlira is left by the fire on the snowy plain, next to a weapon planted in the snow. The prophet's voice still trails after her, advising her to run from her own fate with all her cunning and resourcefulness. Meanwhile, in her fiery domain, Flay sits on a balcony, humming and happily listening to the screams below. She enjoyed the warm beds and abundant food, but her greatest pleasure is a charred then. She breaks into a predatory smile. A burned then isn't a tragedy for her, it's pure bliss. Her twisted morals are obvious just from her shark-like teeth. A reporting night relays the soldiers' new form of entertainment. They want to play football with the princess's head. Flay lazily declines. She's fine as she is. Instead of playing, she complains. The kingdom surrendered way too fast. Flay was counting on a massive, drawn-out bloodbath and ended up with a bloody letdown. So she suggests the soldiers swap the princess's head for the prince's and play a 4-on-4 match. The reporting knight cautiously asks, is there even a madman left who would dare challenge the empire? The answer arrives instantly. An imperial herald unrolls a scroll and announces the emperor's orders. A massive undead horde has appeared at the northern wall, and Flay and her troops are ordered to wipe out the necromancer and his corpses. For her, this isn't alarming news. It's a gift from fate. Hearing about the undead, she smirks with satisfaction. Madness is exactly what feeds her hunger. Deciding not to miss such a chance, Flay kicks the crown onto the stones and orders her fighters to fall in around her. Dark knights line up in heavy armor. Flay herself stands before them in a red hood. She's leading the squad to paint the wall red, and with phrasing like that, no one expects a simple renovation. Baring her teeth, she issues a brief command. The march to war begins. Venlira silently leads Sword Harrier and Murin some through the snowy pass. It's as if the frost, the wind, and the two companions behind her don't affect her at all. This icy silence quickly gets on their nerves. Murin points it out bluntly. Their guide hasn't uttered a single word. In 2 weeks of travel, Murin hasn't heard a peep from her. She jokes that Venlira acts more like an actual corpse than a traveling companion. Sword just awkwardly grunts in response. The skeleton stands with her back to them and doesn't argue. The corpse comparison, mildly speaking, hit the bullseye. But Sword is tormented by a much more practical question. By what miracle is the necromancer's head floating in the air at all? And the questions aren't groundless. Back in his office, Thor Vinland explained to Sword and Murin, the undead from Spireberg are linked to a female warrior who died very recently. Furthermore, the deceased warrior grew up in Spireberg, which means the guildmaster had a very specific thread leading to that city. He put the facts together. A warrior escapes the knights, vanishes in Spireberg, and soon a whole undead legion springs up near a village. It's a bit too convenient of a coincidence. Venlira's combat style only deepened the suspicions. Thor recalls how she raised her hand in battle, and instantly compares that gesture to the movement of the blonde girl who met the skeleton. They mirror each other perfectly, but Murin's sum isn't rushing to label the necromancer an enemy. In her opinion, she isn't plotting anything evil. She is simply broken and lost, much like the adventurers themselves. Thor Vinland only half agrees. He's sure the skeleton isn't an enemy, but why she needs the northern ridges and whether she'll become an ally, the guildmaster has no idea. But there is one thing he doesn't doubt. Venlira will be a key figure in toppling the empire. That's why Thor tasks the two Nords, Sword and Murin, with being her guides. Both are rank 5 quartz-class adventurers and frontline fighters. They definitely weren't sent into the snowdrifts for their looks. Sword remains on guard. The necromancer is too unpredictable, and he wonders if her goals will align with the guild's. Thor Vinland tells him not to worry and calmly rolls up the document. The entire gamble relies entirely on the guildmaster's gut feeling. According to him, it has never failed yet. It's we have a plan. Now we just have to survive the consequences level of confidence. But Sword suddenly tenses up, and on the mountain pass, his anxiety gets an answer. Venlira stops and looks toward the distant mountains. They call out to her. The chosen road leads straight to Spireberg. She confirms it without hesitation. They are indeed going to Spireberg, even if just for a short visit. Meanwhile, in the forest, the blonde apprentice sets up a new look for her mentor. She happily raises a paper bag over her. The girl pulls the bag over her head, gives a thumbs up, and turns the fearsome undead into a little creature with starry eyes. Following this forest antic, the path leads them to a mountain town nestled among tiled roofs and cliffs. The blonde girl leads Venlira, wearing the paper bag, down the street past a tavern. Passers-by simply go about their business. Right at the entrance, the apprentice holds onto her hand and cheerfully flashes a peace sign, as if she brought the grand prize of the evening to the tavern, not a necromancer. The hostess of the abandoned tavern greets them with a wave and a playful wink. With this welcome, the group heads into the quiet upper hall of the tavern. Behind the bar, the girl and the hostess smile at the skeleton. She still hasn't taken off the paper bag. Hospitality quickly turns into entertainment. Venlira grabs some darts in front of the dartboards, while the apprentice and the tavern patrons wait for the throw. They don't have to wait long. The darts fly one after another, hitting dead center. After such a bullseye, the necromancer throws her hands up. The girl and the patrons erupt into joyful cheers. The successful throw warms up the whole room. Patrons drink, dance, and play. The hostess oversees the chaos, while the apprentice sits next to the skeleton at the bar. Even the paper bag seems to have happily curved eyes now. The disguise suddenly becomes her happiest face. Outside, the tavern's sign with 2 beer mugs hangs peacefully above the entrance. But then the hall empties and goes dark. There's no one by the targets anymore, only the 2 dartboards remain. Venlira, paper bag on her head, wanders through the empty hall of the abandoned tavern. No patrons, no cheerful noise, just darkness. Reaching rock bottom of this depressing evening, she silently lowers her head. The necromancer sits on the floor and tightly clasps her bandaged hands. Now she is entirely alone with her thoughts. And yet, someone slams a mug of beer in front of her hands. An unseen conversationalist informs her the tavern closed down a very long time ago, but they don't chase her away. The voice understands the reason for the visit. The skeleton came to relive the old days, but she's an eternity too late. In a memory, the hostess of the abandoned tavern sits at the bar and teases Venlira. She has finally taken off her fashionable paper bag. Raising a bottle of wine, the hostess smiles mysteriously at her reflection, as if she recognized the guest long before this meeting. The necromancer asks bluntly how she was figured out. The hostess explains she heard a lot about the master of the boy who worked here, though, for some reason, no one mentioned the master was undead. At the same time, the hostess introduces the wine in the guest's cup. It's Dione, a simple peasant wine, a symbol of a new beginning. But the bottle wasn't just a lucky find. The blonde girl left it with the hostess before departing. The apprentice wanted to one day share this wine with Venlira on a journey together. At these words, she merely stays silent. The meaning of the old bottle is revealed by Sword Harrier's memory. Adventurers shared this drink before hitting the road, turning the booze into a small prayer for a safe journey. Except Sword adds a grim detail. This wine hasn't been sold for ages. The reason is simple and sad. There are no adventurers left in this town. Against the backdrop of the dead city, a horrifying vision appears. The kingdom lies in ruins, fires rage all around, and monsters of a sinister vision roam freely. A voice acknowledges Venlira didn't take up arms for nothing, but it warns she chose the wrong path. The multi-eyed spectral entity presses even harder. It says, Venlira might save the citizens of the Empire as an outcome of this war, but by the end of the road, she won't be the person the boy wanted her to be. Returning from the nightmare, Venlira dryly replies that she doubts that, and if it were up to her apprentice, she would have chosen a completely different ending for her mentor. She is reminded of what the apprentice wanted, for Venlira to be at least a little happier and drown a bit less in her own gloom. Her abandoned gear is already lying nearby. In the memory, her apprentice leaves, trusting her gear to the tavern hostess. She is supposed to pass it to Venlira if she ever comes back. An illustrated book lies open on the table. It's a fairy tale about allies, saving people, and defeating evil. The exact classic trope that makes adventurers dive headfirst into trouble. The young tavern worker once lived out this fairy tale alongside ruby-class adventurers. That's why his warm smile now carries a bitter edge. The old adventuring party flashes before her eyes. One word brings their past together: adventure. The tavern hostess finishes the thought. Venlira's apprentice dreamed of one day going on that kind of journey with her. Venlira is silent for a long time. Then she lowers her hand and quietly repeats a single word: adventure. Remembering the young tavern worker, she admits, vengeance blinds even the wise, and she was walking a crooked path again. Everyone thought she was the boy's master, but in the end, he was the teacher. After this, she decides to shoulder all the hearts entrusted to her. No complaints, and then simply gives thanks for the drink. The tavern hostess catches the shift in her voice and asks directly, where is Venlira heading now? She reaches across the bar with her bandaged hand and reminds her of the hostess's own words. Dione means a new beginning. In another memory, the blonde elf, the envoy's companion, smiles and decides there's no reason to linger. He remembers how, a long time ago, he set out on a journey alongside that very boy. Venlira and the blonde elf step onto a glowing path that once became their last. But now, it's not another quest for revenge, it's a true adventure. Thus begins the story of the skeleton envoy. Following the conversation, Sword Harrier returns with a white cloth. Murin instantly rushes over to find out how it ended. The answer is a brand new route. Murin announces that from now on, the squad will stick exclusively to main roads. She also mocks Sword for his recent snowy stroll that froze him to the bone. While Murin is having fun, Venlira casually places a hand on her shoulder and calls both companions the little ones. This sudden promotion in the family hierarchy makes the girl completely freeze up. This familiarity makes Murin take a closer look at Sword. She notices, after the talk, something inside him shifted. He merely gives a meaningful smile. It seems the answer has finally been found. The source of his confidence quickly surfaces. Thor Vinland hands him a scroll with a kind smile. Remembering that gesture, Sword admits Thor has a terrifyingly accurate eye for people. As the guildmaster walks ahead, Sword and Murin rush after him. Can't fall behind the head of the guild after all. And along the way, the story makes a useful pit stop. The current adventurer system is divided into 10 tiers. At the top is the Diamond 10th rank. At the bottom is the Earthen 1st. In between are Corundum, Emerald Jade, Yellow Jade, Jade, Quartz, Apatite, Talc, and Stone. Ranks are further split into lower, middle, upper classes, and superhumans. The latter are separated from the rest by the Supreme Wall. This ladder isn't just for show. Adventurers are forbidden from taking quests above their rank, but the higher you climb, the fatter the reward. Gold coins don't jump into your hands on their own. Most people never even make it past the 7th, Yellow Jade rank. Those who scale the Supreme Wall are already called superhumans. Meanwhile, Sword draws his sword, ready to demonstrate the difference in practice. The 8th rank marks the start of the Trailblazers. They venture solo into uncharted lands, where a hooded archer might run into a long-necked forest monster in the bushes. There is another path to glory, becoming a frontline fighter, like a warrior with a two-handed axe who cleaves through wave after wave of monsters alone. And the absolute elites grow to the level of a white-armored general of the Empire. Then they lead entire legions into battle, like the Imperial Spearmen. Simply put, your rank dictates exactly what kind of problems you can chop down with your sword. It all starts small. A green humanoid monster loses its head to a single swift strike. The body flops into the grass, and Sword calmly walks past with a bloodied blade. Trashing pests like that only earns you a lower rank, but he's already raising his sword again. It seems the forest decided to send a more respectable opponent. A one-eyed giant emerges from the trees near the mountains. Now Sword faces a behemoth capable of ruining the entire expedition with one hand. And Murin steps up to show the mid-rank level. She vaults over a colossal mountain boar, winding up her polearm. The strike is so heavy that a loud boom shakes the boar's carcass. Murin drives her blade deep into the beast. A graphic confirmation. Monsters like this are a job for middle-class adventurers. But Sword awkwardly shifts the conversation to something far weirder than a single hacked-up boar. The bloodied blade is suddenly wrapped in a purple glow, and the question of ranks suddenly becomes incredibly timely. Standing in the clearing, he looks at 3 defeated top-tier monsters and dumbfoundedly admits every single one of them was an upper-class beast. Venlira notices Sword getting distracted by the mountain of corpses and demands he listen. He hastily assures her he is. Now that she has his attention, she asks for her companion's rank. Murin and Sword reply. Both are in the Quartz, 5th class. The necromancer genuinely considers this a pretty high result, though she quickly clarifies the ranking system has changed quite a bit since her youth. Then the companion drops another surprise. Once upon a time, she was a famous Ruby-class adventurer. Sword and Murin hear the name and try to recall where they've heard it before. Murin instead bursts out laughing. To her, the Ruby class only exists in fairy tales, and the story of a legendary warrior sounds like a bad joke. Sword stays irritably silent while his companion even brings up the Undead Legion. At the mention of the Legion, the bloodied blade is once again entwined with streams of purple magic. It seems her conversation partners forgot that wasn't the necromancer's entire toolkit, and the reminder is flawless. A blackened purple spectral beast rises behind Murin's back. Sword's laughter is cut off instantly. She adds 3 more pink spectral beasts to the mix. They burst from the earth with heavy stomps and a deafening crash. All jokes aside, Sword begs her to put her magical petting zoo away immediately. The necromancer dismisses the summons. Smoke and torn earth are all that's left. Murin recovers on all 4s, while Venlira immediately teases her for being a coward. She doesn't let Murin catch her breath, mocking that nerds ought to be tougher. But this taunt suddenly strikes an old chord. Venlira remembers her former adventuring party. The blonde girl who met the skeleton surfaces from her memory. She sits across from her mentor in the middle of a foggy clearing. The girl smiles brightly and reaches out to her, as if this was exactly the moment she was missing. And then she gently takes her hand. That's it, the exact feeling the necromancer was trying to remember. With this thought, the journey continues through the northern foothills. Murin asks her companion why she's climbing into mountains crawling with monsters, where people themselves practically turn into beasts. She answers without dramatic pauses. She has old business in the north, plus there's loot to be found. Murin zeroes in on the necromancer's past plan, invading with an undead legion until some mage with a goatee vaporized the entire army with a force field. Sword joins the conversation. He doesn't believe a standard generator could output that kind of power. She clarifies, the field wasn't standard at all. It turns out the barrier was created by a mage from the previous hero's party. On the front lines of the demon lord's domain, he held back the undead at a magical barrier, so the specs on that thing were far from toy level. Now Sword sees where this is going. If the undead forces don't work anymore, they'll need a human army to overthrow the Empire. Murin is already putting 2 and 2 together. The necromancer confirms the guess. She plans to make the northern tribes her her allies. Murin views this idea with heavy skepticism. To her, Northerners are just wild, shaggy threats, and Sword points out if the plan works, their companion's power will be the greatest on the continent. And to think her previous mindset was so much simpler. Chop off the Emperor's head and kick it around like a ball. A very diplomatic plan indeed. However, the blonde girl who met the skeleton talked her out of that idea. So instead of dismemberment, Venlira sets a new goal to properly rebuild the empire. Murin Sum gets visibly tense at this change of course. She herself admits the conversation took a drastically dark turn. Time to change the subject stat. The new topic hits a bullseye. The necromancer declares that Murin and Sword failed the great hunt and fled south. Both flinch at the accurate read. The road ahead is long, so she promises to smooth out their rough edges with some training, and orders Murin and Sword to attack. Sword instantly tries to dodge the topic. Like, it's a long road, maybe they should just keep walking. But Venlira leaps onto the rocks in a cloud of purple energy. Now, she announces, her cute learning through play session begins. No drive, no discipline, time to fix that. He hears the first rule of the game loud and clear. Start running. The reason appears instantly. Her bull-like summon looms over Murin and Sword, giving them exactly 10 seconds to save themselves. The adventurer protests. No one signed up for this kind of training. He yells for Murin's help and honestly states the problem. The necromancer isn't joking, she's just crazy by default. But Murin is silent. Sword just looks back at her in confusion. She tosses back that she wouldn't want to be in his shoes and leaves, leaving the bull-like beast next to the necromancer and its miserable target. She begins the countdown right next to her summon, though, after 7, she skips straight to 1. Sword gets even more frantic at this rigged refereeing. Time's up. She immediately informs the adventurer, right to his face, practically touching the bull's snout. The summon lunges forward, jaws wide open. Sword has to duck and sprint for his life. The purple hand of her bull-like summon stretches across the forested valley, and a bitter thought rings in Venlira's memory. The child, the warrior, and all the rest are gone, but the memory remains. Against this backdrop, she just giggles maliciously next to her summon. Standing on its head, Venlira formally declares the 2 runaways her official second batch of apprentices. They weren't in the plans, but it's too late to object now. Sword smirks, promising with theatrical flair to forge these apprentices into human weapons. Her bull-like summon chases after Murin, while Sword flees in a different direction. The necromancer resolves to never lose sight of her own path again. She asks her friends to keep their eyes on her until the very end. Only then can she stay true to herself. And all this so the time to come won't feel so lonely. Above the forested mountain valley, a massive explosion cloud erupts. Murin notices the blast. She peers into the distance, circling her fingers like a scope, and immediately goes on high alert. She has good reason. A giant red-haired female warrior steps into the forest clearing, escorted by Flay's dark knights. Towering over the armed men, she triumphantly announces she finally found her target. Venlira's training goes without any handicaps, as usual. Her bull-like summon towers over the clearing and sends Sword Harrier flying with a single swipe, along with another fighter. Sword lands horribly. He barely covers his head before another heavy strike craters the ground next to him. After that, Sword stops playing the hero. He screams for timeout right this second. The beast nearly killed him, but there is no timeout. Dull impacts keep echoing through the mountain forest, while someone's desperate scream demands an end to this madness. Flay Varknight crashes the noise. Venlira's summon shatters the earth near Sword, and the red-haired warrior immediately charges the monster. Flay waits for no explanations or invitations. With a wild smirk, he dashes forward, leaving Sword behind. His blazing lunge slashes the summon with bright cutting flashes. The strikes ripple across the beast's entire body. However, the beast refuses to be a punching bag. It launches Sword up on its palm, while Flay spins in the air and lands a strike anyway. In the middle of this chaos, Flay suddenly ends up upside down right in front of Venlira and greets her with a completely calm expression. For this abrupt intro, she instantly delivers a heavy blow. Venlira crumples amidst the crash, but Flay doesn't get distracted by the fallen opponent. He rockets toward the bull-like summon, twisting a spiral of cutting energy around himself. Next up, the Dragon Breaker, Earth Ridge, tears into the beast. The vertical strike rips its body open and blows up the ground beneath its feet. From this wreckage, Murin Sum calls out to Venlira in alarm, while Flay's knights are already forming up behind her. She emerges from the smoke, coughs, and coldly scolds her attackers. Sneaking up without a proper greeting is, in her opinion, utterly rude. Hearing this remark, Flay finally demands to know who is standing in front of him, and then introduces himself, addressing her as the ghost of Spireberg. Flay Varknight drops the big reveal. He is one of the 4 horsemen of the Empire, and he came here to start a war with Venlira. Hearing 4 horsemen, Sword Harrier realizes this is one of the Imperial bastards Godi warned them about. Flay is pleased with the intro and suggests getting down to business. Venlira accepts the challenge without breaking a sweat and tells him to get ready. Right after that, he drops like a rock, weapon extended. She raises her blade to guard. Their first clash flash shakes the slope. Dust and a burst of energy erupt from the ground. Flay dodges her blade, neatly sweeps his opponent, and instantly launches into the air. He clearly isn't going to let her breathe. From above, he brings down a crushing strike on Venlira. She only manages to block with her glowing blade. But the block isn't perfect. She skids down the slope, trying to break after the massive attack. As Venlira recovers, Flay admits her fighting style is disgustingly unpredictable. You expect the blade from one side, and the hit comes from another. Plus, her joints bend like a damn monster. Having figured out her fighting style, he dives into a new attack anyway, cursing this disgusting job mid-flight while she readies her purple blade. Instead of a standard block, Venlira just snaps her fingers, and that snap turns into a strike. Her elongated arm violently smashes Flay right in the face. But Flay doesn't freeze. He grabs her extended arm, twists and breaks it, then hurls Venlira away. She slams heavily into the dirt, kicking up a cloud of dust. Seeing his opponent distracted, Flay Varknight mockingly declares, without an army behind her, her fighting is mediocre at best, and follows up with a provocation, demanding she stop thinking about anything else and focus on their fight. The source of her distraction stands nearby. Flay's knights prepare to attack, while he sneers that Venlira is worried about these pathetic runts and promises to bury them right next to her. In response, she asks with obvious contempt, is Flay really the one who's going to bury her? However, Venlira calmly acknowledges his strength. His combat instincts, monstrous attack range, and sheer discipline are genuinely impressive. But she doesn't plan to end this with a standard slugfist. She raises her hands and prepares a new technique. Flay instantly exploits her weak spot. He smirks and announces that bad eyesight is a fatal flaw for a fighter. But the sneer evaporates fast. He suddenly senses danger right behind him, because Venlira's bull-like summon is already looming at his back. A colossal purple-black beast, fangs and burning eyes, not a sight for the faint of heart. Catching Flay in this moment, she calls for Murin Sum and Sword Harrier, and orders them to attack immediately. But instead of a fair trade-off, a smoke bomb detonates in the forest. Everything is swallowed by thick pink smoke. Under the cover of smoke, Venlira's purple beast carries the whole crew through the forest. Murin complains that no one warned her. Venlira points out she warned them multiple times, and Sword suffers independently because nobody told him about the smoke bomb. On the run, she is even ready to break down the bomb's recipe: ground Tehran chili, explosive Miss Turtle shell, and some questionable alchemy. Murin declines the masterclass on the spot, but the jokes stop when Murin asks about the plan. If Flay Varknight really is one of the four horsemen, an entire army wouldn't save them. Venlira finally grasps the problem and admits, in her current state, she can't stop Flay either. Plus, the fugitives have already run past the warning runes on the trees. Too late to turn back, all they can do is keep running. So she tells her companions to make as much noise as possible. But Sword reminds them, first, they need to see exactly who's on their tail, and they don't have to look long. Speierberg's Imperial Knights are catching up, riding a second purple hound. Flay leads the chase. He laughs, mistakes the hounds for an undead legion, and excitedly declares war on Venlira. She draws her sword and answers with the northern style, parrying an attack right from the back of her purple beast. Flay Varknight launches above the slope, spinning his weapon, and unleashes his rotating spiral style. His strike meets Venlira, and her purple beast's counterattack. Mad Hound's guillotine clashes with Mountain Ridge torque. The techniques collide, and the sky above the forest erupts in a blinding red-purple flash. But a massive red energy slash rips through the flash. It slams right into the purple beast. The shockwave flattens the forest at the foot of the mountains. A wall of pink smoke rises once again. Amidst the ruins, he just giggles in pure satisfaction. He loves it all: the colossal undead, the sneaky smoke bomb, and her sword with the unfamiliar style. The more weirdness his opponent pulls out, the more fired up Flay gets. He demands the fight get even more interesting, and she sits among the rocks, complaining about the dust storm instead of answering. What a hassle. He managed to dirty a proper lady's clothes. He instantly snaps back. To look in a mirror, she'd first need actual eyes. Next comes a kindergarten-level duel, just with weapons. She reminds Flay how he completely missed her blade. He calls her a runaway, and then they trade insults about her bony figure and his outfit. He keeps mocking her flashy gear, and then sharply asks the main question, why won't she summon her undead legion? Venlira coldly replies that she's already getting disappointed in him. Flay is strong, but he's still distracted by Murin Sum and Sword Harrier. Then he leans in almost face-to-face and suggests solving this annoyance the easiest way possible, killing both her companions. The red-eyed entity flashes in the dark forest. The threat gets even dirtier. Murdering Murin and Sword should push her into a rage and force her to fight at full strength. He gets practically nose-to-nose with her, but she just chuckles. Getting in an opponent's face with that much arrogance is straight-up stupidity. Flay doesn't listen and keeps boasting, promises to crush her empty skull. He pays for that babble immediately. A barrage of arrows or projectiles slams into the ground around him, forcing him to dive into the dirt to dodge the fire. From the ambush, someone calls him an arrogant idiot, while he, lying under under fire, just glares and clicks his tongue. Venlira calmly confirms Flay's name and tells him to pass her regards to the mountain tribes that raised all the northern people. The archer in the tree still holds the high ground while she finishes her message with the name of the All-Mother. Flay Varknight sits on the ground next to a massive sword. She is riddled with arrows, only angrily clicking her tongue. While Flay licks her wounds, Etvard Venlira casually sits among the stones and arrows. He passes Flay regards from the All-Mother and the mountains, the cradle of the northern tribes. This message doesn't scare Flay in the slightest. She just grins like a predator. Flay puts the pieces together fast. Etvard was rushing to the northerners for a reason. Realizing this, she yanks an arrow out of her shoulder without any ceremony. Flay calls the whole spectacle a cheap trick and then violently dashes away, breaking through her dark nights. Etvard doesn't even try to stop her. Instead, he mockingly suggests Flay waste her time chatting with the northerners. But Flay confesses she needs a war she can truly enjoy. She waves goodbye to Etvard, taunts him as Bones, and leaves. The Imperial Knights are left behind. Watching the psycho leave, Etvard suddenly hears someone desperately screaming for their mother in the distance. Sword Hawker Harrier and Murin, some run toward the scream. Sword grabs Etvard by the skull, glad he's in one piece, while Murin anxiously points at the people nearby. At her hint, he remembers. Etvard completely forgot about the ones who laid down the covering fire. He waves to the northerners sitting in the trees, thanks them for the barrage, and starts introducing himself. But the introduction is cut short. An arrow pins itself right into the skeleton's raised palm. The shooter turns out to be a masked archer of a northern tribe. She laughs at the talking skeleton and promises to add his skull to her trophy collection. After a threat like that, Sword points out that Etvard completely forgot how wonderful the northerners are. Murin can only awkwardly agree. Above the clearing, the archer and a red-haired warrior with an axe keep their eyes on Etvard, Sword, and Murin. They decide to step in if things go the right way. Very soon, the whole group of 5 breaks into a sprint down the forest trail. There's only one rule right now: run. Their dash is spotted by a purple-haired female warrior of the Red Ram tribe. She instantly raises the alarm. Intruders spotted. Following the alarm, arrows rain down on the runners, slamming into the dirt at their feet. Sword panics and complains, aren't the northerners supposed to be allies? On the run, Etvard reminds Murin of the treaty with the northern tribes, signed about a century ago. The red-haired warrior snarks that their timing is absolutely impeccable. Etvard latches onto a new idea. His companions are also Nordlings, meaning they can state their names and pass. But they explain they are fugitives, and that will only make things worse. As if to prove the point, the talk about Sword's problems is interrupted by an unfamiliar voice. He's called a half-breed, and the bars of a cage crash down around him. Seeing how easily they lock people in cages here, the skeleton decides now is definitely the time to state his name. He launches into a grand speech, declares himself Etvard Venlira, a Nord, and officially demands an audience with the chieftain. But the skeleton's declaration is met with suspicion, not respect. Sword, the purple-haired warrior, and the masked archer doubt he's even one of them. He, however, joyfully concludes that the plan finally worked. And at that exact moment, the iron bars slam shut around him with a loud clang. Instead of an audience, Etvard ends up in a cell alongside Sword and Murin. A flawless plan indeed. Sword immediately offers sarcastic thanks for the full iron bar experience. And then, unable to handle his own misery, Sword violently bangs his head against the grating. While Sword suffers, Murin curiously asks Etvard if he really was a Nord. He confirms he was, but a very long time ago. Sword sharply cuts off this casual chat. In his opinion, they're missing the main point. The 3 of them are in extremely deep trouble. The reason for his panic is simple. While they were being dragged here, Sword realized they were sitting in a village of the Red Ram tribe. And now, he's terrified the chieftain will recognize him. The thought makes Sword clutch his head. Their plan was simple: drop Etvard and Murin at the edge of the mountains, then leave, avoiding any encounters with the Nords. His wailing is interrupted by the clanking at the grate. Etvard cautiously turns his skull toward the cell door. Behind the bars, a Red Ram guard informs Etvard the chieftain demands his presence. A rather unique formal invitation, considering the guest is already in a cage. Refusal is not an option. The guard leads the skeleton in a wooden pillory and chains through the snowy village, while Murin and Sword follow. As the convoy drags him down the street, Etvard recognizes these places. The village hasn't changed a bit. The locals spot the prisoner quickly. The villagers stare at the talking undead, rumors of which have already spread through the whole settlement. At the residence, they are met by Vidin the Red, chieftain of the Red Ram tribe. His horned guard stands before him. Vidin instantly accuses Etvard of shamelessly posing as a Nord. The trial is moved to a stone arena. There, Vidin shifts his heavy glare to the other prisoners and calls them idiots. It turns out his wrath is aimed at Sword and Murin. The chieftain accuses both of them of daring to return here. Murin tries to argue they've been mistaken for someone else, but Vidin shows zero mercy. Etvard cuts in and calmly states that he really is from the north. He then suggests taking off the chains and talking talking normally. For a skeleton, this is peak diplomacy. But Vidin isn't here to chat. He calls Etvard an outsider and explains, stealing their clan's name is considered a severe crime here. The chieftain tears into Sword and Murin as well. He brands them failures who never even earned the right to bear the tribe's name. Then Etvard realizes the root of the bullying. Sword and Murin were tossed out like garbage for failing the great hunt. He tears off his wooden pillories and throws it in the chieftain's face that the old, cruel customs are still crippling these lands. Vidin sneers maliciously. Failing the hunt, he says, is far from the only reason, and Etvard, in his opinion, talks way too much about things he doesn't understand. The blonde warrior of the Red Ram tribe tries to intervene, but Vidin stops him. He'll deal with this chatty skull personally. Etvard immediately notes that he hit a nerve. Vidin confirms the guess and charges forward with 2 broad blades. The chieftain promises to boil Etvard into a bone stew and brings down his first heavy strike, but Etvard Venlira just extends a hand to meet the attack, while Vidin the Red keeps slicing the air with his blades. White streaks of slashes sweep across the arena. Sword, Hawker Harrier, and Murin, some jump back as their shackles shatter. Murin looks at her freed hands and understands everything. Etvard Venlira wasn't aiming at the prisoners, but perfectly at their pillories. Having freed his companions, Etvard orders them to back off, and just in time, Vidin is already charging him with his blades. The chieftain leaps into the air and winds up his weapons for a chopping strike. He puts every ounce of his rage into the swing. Vidin lands and unleashes a flurry of strikes upon Etvard. The arena turns into a vortex of cutting trails. Murin watches the onslaught in sheer shock. Such speed and power. It's no longer a fight, but an attempt to Julian the air itself. Everyone in the tribe knew about Vidin's power, but even his furious assault isn't getting the expected result. Etvard remains completely unfazed right in the middle of the storm of attacks, and that scares the onlookers more than the blades. He parries strikes from every angle, one after another, as if Vidin is swinging training sticks, not lethal weapons. The chieftain refuses to yield and grabs his axes, but Etvard dodges every heavy swing. The axes fly non-stop, and he deflects them effortlessly. For Etvard, this ferocious combo changes absolutely nothing. The arena, however, takes a severe beating. Fleeing northerners scramble down the stone steps, running from the devastating impacts. While the audience scatters, Etvard leaps over Vidin. He slips right between the swings of his axes. The chieftain watches these evasions and contemptuously compares his opponent to a flea, saying all he can do is bounce around. Along with the insult, he chops with all his might again, and demands Etvard show if he has anything besides jumping. He answers that he is capable of much more. With one crushing blow, Etvard knocks Vidin off his feet. Standing next to the downed chieftain, he calls him a lightweight. Pleasantries successfully exchanged. Vidin tries to strike again, but Etvard catches his arm. There's no real strength in this swing, he explains. After this lesson, the chieftain is slammed into the stone floor. A destructive shockwave ripples across the arena, but he rises from the rubble, grips both axes, and stubbornly insists the dead have no place among the living. Therefore, they belong back in the dust. Vidin doesn't get to finish this grim sermon. His legs suddenly give out, and he heavily drops to one knee. The chieftain's body simply goes on strike. He notices the painful impact points and realizes his opponent managed to block his acupuncture points. He can't even twitch, and then the answer dawns on him. The dead really do return to dust, but the living remember them and keep walking forward. Etvard emerges from the smoke and irritably snaps. He's heard that sermon so many times he's sick of it. But in the current situation, he says, there is one major problem. For Vidin, the problem is incredibly humiliating. A living man is on his knees, while a dead man stands tall before him. Etvard steps closer, surrounded by purple power. He presses the chieftain even harder. He cannot move a single muscle while a corpse steps on him. Having broken his opponent's pride, he places a hand on his head. Purple energy flows through the chieftain's body, and Etvard declares, now he can have a proper talk with the Red Ram. Vidin admits he's taken heavy beatings before, but this fight specifically reminded him of childhood sparring sessions with his own master. The comparison is clearly not in the chieftain's favor. He accepts total defeat and finally asks what the victor wants from him. Etvard's answer has been ready for a while. He orders Vidin to summon all the chieftains of the northern tribes, because next they are going to strike the empire together. The blonde warrior of the Red Ram calls out to the chieftain. Vidin chuckles at Etvard's ambition. However, he refuses to stay a loser and promises to include him in the upcoming Great Council of the northern tribes. But there isn't a hint of friendship here. Vidin bluntly states he doesn't trust the skeleton and orders him to wait at the estate of an old man named Sword who kept the place in order. Murin instantly catches the estate's name. Trapped in the wooden pillory next to Sword, she asks, is it really Sword's estate? The reaction confuses the chieftain. He is surprised. He was sure those who came to the Red Ram tribe already knew the whole story. And the awkward question immediately falls on Sword Hawker Harrier. Did he really not tell Etvard anything? In response, the red-haired prisoner just nervously giggles, breaking a sweat. The conversation brings us to the the snow-covered estate. There, the outsider is yanked back and told to listen carefully. By the wooden house bearing a red crescent emblem, the big secret is revealed. This guy's real name is Sword Hawker Harrier. But the mystery gets even more interesting. Sword hails from a kindred tribe, and he's not just a relative from a neighboring camp. He is formally introduced as the next in line to become the chieftain of the Snow Lion Mane tribe. Hidden among the northern ridges, on the lands of the Red Ram tribe, sits a snow-covered village. Wooden houses, gates, surrounding mountains, a place where you literally might need an axe just to fetch some bread. This is exactly where Murin Sum brings Etvard Venlira to Hawker's snowbound estate. Rather than freeze at the main entrance, they decide to step inside. Etvard is still processing the news. His companion wasn't just a weather-beaten adventurer, but a girl from an incredibly noble house. He literally grabs his skull in pure shock. The reason for her awkwardness quickly becomes clear. Sword Hawker Harrier dropped the name Hawker when he left the mountains. He wanted absolutely nothing to do with this house, but the heavy door still creaks and lets him back in. Murin admits being here is hard for her. She retreats to her room, asking to be called if needed. The old walls seem to crush her spirits just as well as Imperial Knights. Etvard notes that she's almost become a different person in this short time. Murin just gives a weak smile. She has no argument against that conclusion. While the guests settle in, they are met by Vanson, the elderly steward of the Hawker estate. He introduces himself with such courtesy, it's as if the masters hadn't been missing for 2 years. Etvard starts to introduce himself and wants to name Murin, but she bows to Vanson herself and cuts the ceremony short. The old steward recognizes her without any explanations. Vanson asks how Murin lived all this time. She awkwardly scratches the back of her head and replies that, overall, she managed. The exact phrasing of someone with way too long a history behind them. Murin does clarify she used to live here as the gardener's daughter, tending to the flower beds with her father, but due to an old mix-up, she had to pretend to be Sword's friend, even though by law, she was his servant. But that explanation isn't enough for her. Murin demands the whole story, since she's already struggling to accept that Sword is supposed to be the future chieftain. Vanson gladly takes up the tale. Sword is the rightful heir, and he came to the Red Ram to learn about life from another tribe. The northern version of studying abroad, frost, axes, and monsters. To prove he was worthy of the title of warrior, he took part in the Great Hunt. There, amid fire and blood, the warriors faced the horned beast of the Great Hunt, a monster the size of a very severe life problem. But they expected more from Sword than just swinging a weapon. In front of the Red Ram people, he had to learn how to lead the tribe as a future chieftain. To do this, he brought his servants to the village and trained day after day, and border skirmishes with Spyerberg's Imperial Knights gave him practice much harsher than any textbook. However, a streak of failures during the Great Hunt shattered the established order. 2 years ago, Sword vanished without a trace, taking Murin with him. He left the estate with a shield on his back, but couldn't escape his past. After their disappearance, the other servants couldn't stand the weight and scattered to their native tribes. Vanson stayed behind alone to maintain the empty estate. Etvard asks Vanson directly why he stayed at all. A logical question. Guarding a massive house alone is a job for someone with nerves of steel. Vanson answers simply, he couldn't let the house turn into a pigsty for Sword's return. To him, the heir hadn't disappeared, he was just delayed. Those words strike Etvard. He realizes that Murin, too, believed Sword would return all this time. And Sword himself knows. All his tribesmen are waiting for his return. Lying on the wooden floor, he clearly can't just brush off that weight by turning on his side. Meanwhile, Murin runs into Etvard in the mountain valley. He asks what she's doing here, and this sudden meeting drags another piece of their shared past to the surface. Murin explains that she was just tidying up a flower bed. Her family used to work as gardeners for Sword. Even after running away, her hands instinctively reach out to save the flowers. While tending the plants, she admits Sword really was a good candidate for chieftain, but she didn't run away with him for the sake of a future title. Since Etvard is around, Murin decides to tell him how it all started, and the story shifts to the days when she was just a child. Back then, Po Sum and a tiny Murin bow respectfully before Chieftain Hawker Riemann Russ and his son, Sword. Po introduces himself as a gardener, and his daughter as his only companion in this new life. Hawker Riemann Russ studies the guests in silence. With a face like that, the chieftain is either making a fateful decision or judging if the newcomers will survive the northern weather. Finally, the chieftain welcomes Po and his daughter to his tribe's lands. Behind his throne towers Chieftain Hawker's white-maned lion. The hospitality looks highly convincing. The chieftain declares that Sword's exile to the north was the will of the great progenitor. He tells the boy to live among the northerners and become one with them. Murin responds with a vow. They will repay the chieftain's mercy as long as they live. Sword immediately echoes her words. The alliance begins without long speeches. After that, Sword's mother tasks him with showing Murin around. They are about the same age. The boy is surprised but obediently agrees. Thus, amidst the snow-covered houses of the mountain village, their acquaintance begins. No battles, no titles, no escapes, just a walk around their new home. On the snowy road, Sword awkwardly introduces himself to Murin. She replies shortly, but quite amicably. Not a bad start. Then Murin hands him a stick with a pink object on the end. Sword takes it as an offering and is just about to say thanks for the weird gift. But the gift turns out to be northern goat droppings. Sword tosses the stick with a yell, while Murin quietly giggles. Friendship in the north starts with a very specific kind of test. And after an intro like that, Murin isn't shy for a second. She smiles brightly, waves her hand, and introduces herself right back. Sword, however, quickly steers the conversation back to local customs. He warns Murin she is a lower class than him and she could be punished for such liberties. But instead of apologizing, she asks if that difference really matters at all. Sword completely short-circuits at the question. Murin explains a simple truth. Ranks and classes shouldn't stop them from playing together. To her, friendship matters more than the entire northern hierarchy. Sword tries to argue but gives up fast. Under her confident gaze, he has to admit Murin is right, and she instantly secures the victory, calling him a little dense with a mischievous grin. 2 fingers in the air, and the diagnosis is final, with no right to appeal. After that, Sword pulls Murin by the hand, and she pulls him right back. Perfect teamwork. Nobody knows who's actually leading who. The cause of this commotion is quickly found. A boar sprints from a rocky ledge through the grass. Murin, with a spear and sword, bolt after the prey. As the hunters chase the boar, a purple-haired watcher, a bald watcher in glasses, and a white-braided watcher track them from the grass. A dark-haired watcher with a tail joins the crew. The 4 of them don't miss a single move in this loud chase. Murin, it seems, has already made up her mind. She rests the wooden spear on her shoulder and confidently gestures with her hand. She leads a flustered Sword over to the watchers and introduces him like a friend. The bald guy in glasses and the white-braided warrior meet a new acquaintance who doesn't even know what to do with his hands. Murin throws an arm over his shoulder, and Sword stands in awkward silence. It looks like the chieftain's son isn't used to such a warm reception. But the silence doesn't last long. Sword decisively raises a hand with 2 extended fingers. The boy chooses not to hide on the sidelines. And so, the dark-haired guy with a tail, the purple-haired girl, the bald watcher in glasses, and the white-braided warrior gather around Sword and Murin. A simple hunt suddenly turns into the start of a real gang. But what hooks Sword the most is Murin's sum. She doesn't put him on a pedestal just because he's the chieftain's son. She doesn't flatter him and asks for nothing in return. Murin just runs right beside him after a boar as an equal. That's why Murin calls him simply Swordy and asks him to do her the honor. To her, he's not an heir but a friend. Sword finally understands. Murin sees him for exactly who he is, without the title and without other people's expectations. And for the first time, he feels accepted not for his status, but for himself. A few years later, they are resting on a lawn. Sword calls out to Murin, and out of old habit, she calls him Fluffy Head. Amidst the friendly banter, he suddenly asks a serious question. Will he ever be able to be like his mother? Murin pokes fun at the future chieftain for being anxious after a dream, but he admits soon he has to study in the Red Ram tribe, and he's terrified he's not cut out for the role. Murin instantly tells him not to worry. She sits up from the grass, clearly ready to knock those doubts right out of her friend. Flustered, Murin still says what matters. The Snow Lion main tribe believes in Sword, and her support carries special weight. Soon, Swordhawker Harrier arrives at the snowbound fortress, where he is met by Vidin the Red. The chieftain of the Red Ram calls him a young lion and declares, from now on, he will be his teacher. Vidin sets the terms immediately, no coddling allowed. He will pass down everything he knows, and Sword is obligated to keep up. The first lesson doesn't involve books. Sword drags a massive boulder on ropes, while Vidin hammers a simple idea into his head. A chieftain must be the strongest fighter. Otherwise, the tribe will stop believing in him. He pulls the weight to his absolute limit, and the mentor's words press down just as hard as the ropes. The chieftain's strength becomes the strength of the whole tribe. But muscles alone won't cut it. A piece clicks on a tactical map, and the order is brief. Use your head. Vidin breaks down map formations with Sword, while a gray-haired and a green-haired observer watch. He teaches him to calculate battles on the fly. One mistake from the chieftain could cost his tribesmen their lives. Next, Vidin takes his student to the archives to show the scale of the next trial. 2,250 volumes, from northern laws and history to monster encyclopedias. Sword sits at a table buried in books and scrolls and clutches his head. But the order remains the same. Memorize it all down to the last grain. The studying drains him so completely that drops of blood begin to fall onto the open page. He stares at the blood on his palm and shirt. Training under Vidin has already left a very literal mark on him. After his mentor's bloody lessons, Sword sits late in the fortress archives and honestly asks himself, does he even have what it takes to be a future chieftain? In this dark moment, a smiling Murin flashes before his eyes. That memory stops him from drowning completely in his own doubts. And that's enough. Sword's gaze becomes hard and focused. Instead of self-pity, he tells himself to get back in shape and buries himself in the book books and scrolls again. The path to the chieftain's seat, it turns out, is paved with more than just axes and busted lips. About a year into his studies at the Red Ram tribe, Vidin spots Murin, some with a child, at the entrance of the snowy fortress. Their appearance immediately puts Murin and Vanson on high alert. Both whip around as if the fortress just received very bad news. The cause for alarm quickly becomes clear. Beneath Vidin's white hood, only the grim silhouette of his face is visible, and nearby on the ground lies a shattered pot with a yellow flower. The conversation clearly didn't start with pleasantries. Vidin steps out onto the mountain trail, right up to Murin and Vanson. He isn't giving them a chance to avoid this meeting, and that is exactly where Murin hears the horrific news. Swordhawker Harrier abandoned his post and fled, and a single, drooping flower among the stones only emphasizes just how miserably everything has turned out.